Welcome. My name is Johonna Turner, and I am a faculty associate with the Zehr Institute for Restorative Justice, and I also teach at the Center for Justice and Peace Building. I'm really excited to welcome you all to today's webinar on Transformative Justice. So our topic for today is Transformative Justice, and we have a slate of incredible speakers who have a great deal of experience and expertise on this issue. They'll be talking about transformative justice, how it's different from restorative justice, for those of us who may find ourselves more rooted in the restorative justice movement, or restorative justice practitioners can learn from the transformative justice movement. So our guests today are Maccani, Nathan, Shara, and Ejeris Dixon. I'm going to tell you a little bit about each speaker, and then you will hear from them. Maccani is currently employed as a behavioral health clinician with the New York City Mental Health Service Corps. He also works as a generative somatics teacher and practitioner. RJ has been active in social and environmental justice movements since the late 90s. His work over the past decade has been in the fields of transformative justice, somatic coaching and creative arts production, as well as restorative justice. And his academic background includes a master's degree from Hunter's College Silberman School of Social Work, which he just finished last year. Another guest that we have, also in New York, Nathan, Shara. Nathan currently works with individuals and groups as a trauma therapist for survivors as well as perpetrators of abuse. He is a social justice therapist and community educator whose work focuses on healing trauma, cultivating resilience, and building collective power for social change. Nathan has spent over 15 years engaged in grassroots anti-violence organizing and education. And in recent years, his work has especially focused on developing transformative justice responses to intimate violence. Nathan's academic background is varied, but it includes his work at the University of Washington School of Social Work. Ejeris Dixon, another very special guest that we have with us today, is the founding director of Vision Change When Consulting. At Vision Change When, she partners with organizations to build their capacity and deepen the impact of the organizing strategies. Ejeris also serves as a consultant with Roadmap Consulting, a national social justice consulting team. She's an organizer and political strategist with over 15 years of experience working in racial justice, LGBTQ, anti-violence, and economic justice movements. Ejeris, RJ, Nathan, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us today. So now I'll turn it over to you all. And what's going to happen now is that Ejeris, Nathan, and RJ are going to share with us about transformative justice and give us an idea of what this means, of the work that they've been doing in general, but specifically their work in using transformative justice to challenge intimate violence. And then after they present, you all as those of you who are participating will have an opportunity to ask questions, which I will field. I'll read your questions to them. You'll have an opportunity to engage with them after their presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Johonna, and really great to be with everyone who's joining us from the various time zones I imagine you all are in. I know RJ and Ejeris and I are really excited to be with you all and to share some of our thinking and learning on transformative justice and to get to hear what questions you all are in. Just to briefly kind of let you know where we're headed, we wanted to start just by defining transformative justice. We know that both restorative justice and transformative justice are kind of these huge umbrella terms that are getting used in a wide variety of ways. So we wanted to start with some definitions and distinctions of how we're using the term, and then offer some case studies and some of what we see around current TJ practice, transformative justice practice across the US. We'll also be sharing some resources and some key questions that show up for us in our work, and then really open it up to you all for questions and discussion, and really are looking forward to hearing what you all are thinking and the ways that you're grappling with these conversations that we're all in together. So I just want to start by offering a very kind of foundational definition of transformative justice. And one way I really think of it is that transformative justice seeks to provide people who experience harm with immediate safety, long-term healing and reparations, while demanding that people who have done harm take accountability, and mobilizing to shift oppressive social and systemic conditions. And I think it's really this last piece that we want to underscore in some of the distinctions that we've found useful to make from some approaches to restorative justice. So we know that, again, there's kind of a wide range of how people are using the term. And a few pieces we wanted to particularly underscore here. I mean, I think one is just that we really see that the personal is always connected to the social and the political, and that the achievement of healing and justice for individuals really requires that we shift the social conditions that we're all soaking in. And we see this dynamic interplay between individual healing and collective liberation, that actually building the power that we need to shift our society will require addressing the impacts of violence and the impacts of trauma, and that in order to really deeply do the work of healing trauma, we actually need to be able to guarantee people a society in which everyone has access to healthcare and housing and education and freedom from violence and loving relationship. And we know that we're a long ways off from living within those social conditions. So we really hold those as kind of mutually necessary parts of the project. And I think the other side of that is really that we see the social and economic conditions and social norms that allow violence to happen have to be transformed. And that currently state-based responses to violence, including the criminal legal system, including child welfare systems, really not only fail to advance individual justice, but actually are set up for injustice. And I think, many of us who are feeling very overwhelmed and sobered by our current political moment are really in this question and this grapple of if we see the real deep flaws and injustices that are built into the system, and seeing those gaps getting wider, what do we do instead? So just to break down some of the key components, we really see TJ as including responses which understand that individual acts of harm always have collective origins and impacts, and therefore require collective responses. Any attempt to address individual harm just among individuals ends up leaving out a huge kind of network of people who have also participated in creating the context for that violence. And then we also really see these as responses which work to meet immediate needs for justice, while also working towards a long-term vision of liberation. And that means that these responses really need to aspire to not create further harm. So turning to prisons or the police, the criminal legal system, places that we know further harm occurs, is going to perpetuate that violence. I know Ejeris and RJ and I will each be kind of speaking to different examples and having done work in different contexts, but I'll say personally, having really come out of the anti-domestic violence, anti-sexual assault movements, particularly in LGBTQ communities, some of the ways I've really seen this show up were when folks in same-sex relationships turned to the police around violence or harm happening in a relationship, and when law enforcement was called, found both partners being arrested because law enforcement didn't have a way of making a distinction of who was being abusive or who was surviving in a same-sex relationship, for example. When we look at kind of where transformative justice has really grown out of, often we see it's communities that have consistently experienced harm inside of those state responses and systems. Transformative justice also includes responses which seek to address current incidents of violence in ways that will shift the conditions that allow the violence to happen, in ways that prevent future incidences of violence, and really ultimately that end violence. I mean, I think that's the vision we're all holding out for. So really these pieces of not doing further harm and challenging community and systemic violence that have created the conditions feel like I think some of the most central distinctions that we want to underscore here. And I want to talk a little bit about where transformative justice has come from. Really, transformative justice has come out of communities with this long-standing experience of the understanding of the relationships between intimate community and state violence. So when we look specifically, we really see communities of color, particularly women and people of color, incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people, survivors of child sexual abuse, rape, and other forms of intimate violence, and communities impacted by state surveillance, repression, and violence, people with disabilities, immigrant and refugee communities. And that's not by coincidence, right? It's mostly people who have recurring experiences that the police, the prison system, criminal legal systems continue a cycle of generational violence, ongoing violence that unjustly target, oppress, and control their communities, not protect them. So some of the pivotal groups that really played a role in articulating some of the distinctions of transformative justice will also probably be using the term community accountability at times to kind of speak to these approaches. Some of the key groups include Insight, Women and Trans People of Color Against Violence, and they've put together a couple anthologies that offer some really brilliant analysis and thinking around community-based responses. Critical Resistance Abolitionist Organization with chapters around the country. Communities Against Rape and Abuse, which was located in Seattle, which has since folded, but a lot of their writing and thinking really lives on, and some of the folks who were involved in that organizing are very much still in movement. Generation 5, which really started imagining what will it take to create a society that has ended child sexual abuse within 5 generations. And in 2007, at the United States Social Forum, Generation 5 put out a paper called Towards Transformative Justice that I imagine many of you may have seen, really outlining a theory and approach, a set of principles and practices for ending child sexual abuse. We're excited, RJ and I have both been very involved in kind of a rewrite of that document to update this last decade of work in the field that we're imagining will be out in late summer, early fall of this year. Creative Interventions, which some of you also may know, published a really fantastic toolkit a couple of years ago on developing community-based responses to violence and the Storytelling and Organizing Project. And we just really want to lift up that work as some of the kind of foundations that all of us consider ourselves in the lineage of. A couple things before I pass it over to RJ. We know for years there's been ongoing debate, discussion about restorative justice, transformative justice. Is there a difference? Is there any, what are the differences? And, I think there's been some useful writing and thinking. I know there's a piece on the Zehr Institute website kind of engaging this, and I think a link to it went out in the announcement. But some of the distinctions that we found useful are really asking ourselves, what are the goals of this approach to justice? And really considering the near, middle, and long-term goals. I think one of the things that we've really held as central to transformative approaches to justice is that they hold as their aim transformation and liberation. And I'll be saying a little bit more about kind of how we think about those and what we mean by those terms. But really, what are the goals, and really considering that long kind of expanse of time as we're thinking about that. And then we've also found it really important to ask, where is this approach being applied or practiced? And I think as we'll be speaking, you'll hear us talking some about different kinds of interventions and ways that different approaches are being practiced. And one of the things that we're thinking about a lot is, are we working within existing systems and state systems with some relationship to criminal legal interventions, or are we working outside of those? And in the work that we'll be speaking to, we're talking about interventions that are happening outside of state systems and that aren't linked to the state in any way. We know that a lot of the current, particularly US-based practice of restorative justice is happening with some relationship to state systems. And I think one of the kind of questions and invitations we'd like to be in together are, what are the strategic implications of how we think about the kind of limitations and opportunities of each of those locations, and how do those of us doing transformative justice work or restorative justice work align, coordinate, and strategize together with those broader goals of transformation and liberation in mind. Again, I know many of you are probably deeper in the field of restorative justice than I or we are, but I think one thing that we wanted to pull out were just some of the different perspectives on this conversation of restorative justice, transformative justice. And M.K. Harris, in one of the chapters in the Handbook of Restorative Justice, really kind of laid out these 4 different perspectives that keep showing up in these debates. And I just wanted to kind of walk through them and then offer kind of where we kind of weigh in on this, and then I'll pass it along. The first is, this idea that restorative justice and transformative justice are 2 quite different perspectives, and actually different conversations with different bodies of theory and principles. The second is that restorative processes really aim at personal and interpersonal transformation, and in some situations or at times can open spaces for social transformation. The third sort of perspective is that restorative justice falls on a continuum between retributive justice and transformative justice. And then kind of fourth and finally, that RJ and TJ are really the same things, properly understood, and that they both aim at interpersonal as well as larger social transformation. Now, I'm not going to say any of these are right or wrong. I think these questions and tensions add a lot of texture to the grappling for us all. But I think some of what we've really found important to highlight is, one, that we just see both terms being used in a wide variety of contexts to describe a large range of practices. And I think in our view, some of what's getting called restorative justice, we might absolutely consider squarely under the umbrella of transformative justice, and some practices that are getting called transformative justice feel quite punitive at times. So part of what we want to keep asking and interrogating is, what are the principles, what are the goals, what are we seeing is getting produced out of this approach to justice, and how transformative, how liberatory is it for all of the people and communities involved. I think overarchingly, we really see the growth of restorative justice approaches and the kind of growing institutionalization in the sense of restorative justice approaches as a positive sign. It seems like there's a mounting, I won't call it consensus, but a growing sense that the current criminal legal responses that we see in the state justice systems are not working. They're ineffective, they're inefficient, they're not actually producing any kind of meaningful healing or accountability. And the curiosity about and interest in exploring other options is one that we find really exciting. And then alongside that, we see that while some efforts being called restorative justice do align closely with our visions of transformative justice, a lot of what we see happening, particularly within the US, usually don't significantly challenge or dismantle traditional structures of policing, courts, or prisons. And when we look at the ways that racism, homophobia, sexism, violence are playing out inside of those systems and those responses, we just see any response that's aligning with those systems as something we need to trouble and interrogate and push further towards liberatory ends. Some of you might know UK-based author and researcher John Pitts, who says there's a continuing tension between restorative justice as a bottom-up social movement, which is antagonistic to retributive justice, and its top-down incorporation into the justice system. And I think for those of you who are really deeply engaged in this restorative justice work and conversation, I think this tension and this question feels like an important one for us all to be engaging with and answering. And I think, for those of us on the webinar, we really are advocating, pushing for aligning with the bottom-up social movement, even though there may be some relationship with and coordination and strategy that does engage the justice system. Just before I pass it off, I really just want to underscore this piece that whatever an approach may be called, we want to consider and assess its effectiveness based on how it reflects these principles of transformation and how it achieves individual and collective justice. And just to say a little bit about what we mean by transformation, really how we're holding that is that when an individual, when a family, when a community, when a society has undergone transformation, they're able to consistently take new actions that are aligned with their values, even under pressure. So, you know, some of the work that that both RJ and I do around child sexual abuse, if a community member was concerned about child sexual abuse within their faith community, for example, transformed would mean that rather than minimizing the harm or denying the harm or retaliating against someone in a community who is suspected to or has been identified as sexually abusing children, transform would mean that when a community was concerned, they would be able to gather and talk with others in the community, that they would be able to seek education and develop the skills needed to actually face into that challenge, that families and community members could sit and talk with the children and families concerned, and could also sit and talk with the person who's been abusive in the past, and then assessing those needs and dangers, that there would be able to be collective effort and organizing to support the healing and accountability of everyone involved, while also working to organize and educate that entire faith community to change the norms and systems that had created the openings for that abuse. And I offer that just to keep thinking about the kind of scale and breadth of what we're kind of forwarding. And again, I think RJ and Ejeris will be speaking to some more concrete examples that'll illustrate some of what we mean. So with that, I will pass it to you, RJ.
You're muted, Ejeris. So we can't hear you yet.
Hey y'all, we're having a little bit of internet issues, but we're bringing RJ on right now.
No, thank you, no problem.
Thanks, Ejeris. And thank you, Nathan. All right, I got to hear most of that, Nathan, and really enjoyed it. I appreciate how much you engaged with, engaged with some of the restorative justice discourse that we've been kind of exploring since we got invited to do this. I want to share my screen now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the project I was a part of called the Challenging Male Supremacy Project, which was an attempt to respond to sexual assault and intimate partner violence within social justice organizing communities here in New York City. Can everybody see this? How's that look?
Yeah, so we can.
Yeah. Does it look right?
You need to
go to slideshow.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thanks. Okay, here we are. Yeah. So, Ejeris, will you give me my phone? I want to make sure I don't talk too long. Thanks. All right. So the Challenging Male Supremacy Project was formed in 2008. And like I said, it was formed in response to specific instances of sexual assault and intimate partner violence that were happening within different organizing networks, neighborhood-based organizations, many different contexts, all in spaces where people were coming together to organize for social and environmental justice in New York City. And I think this is a common impetus in many places around the country for these sorts of projects to start. Also, the people in New York City that and elsewhere that were really organizing around sexual violence and gender-based violence, there's really few cisgender men who were a part of these initiatives. So the three of us that initially kicked off the project in 2008, Gaurav Jeshnani, Alan, Greg, and myself, had all previously been involved in work around child sexual abuse. Alan and I had both been part of Generation 5, and Gaurav had done work with community-based organizations in Argentina that were organizing around people who had committed child sexual abuse on a pretty broad scale during the dictatorship, and had done that with impunity. And so he'd been part of work organizing there to bring those cases to light and bring some justice. So the three of us sort of came together around the issue of child sexual abuse, and informed by the work that Generation 5 had done, articulating a notion of transformative justice that Nathan got into a bit, and in conversation with a bunch of the other organizations that Nathan mentioned. And the work areas that we took on included community accountability work, so that responding to specific instances of violence, and I'll get into that a bit more in a second. The other thing I'll get into a bit more is we launched something called a study into action. And this was group work with men around gender-based violence. Third thing we did was we collaborated with Generation 5 to create a series of digital stories. I love it that Ejeris is me now and I'm you. That's fun. Digital stories of male survivors of child sexual abuse, male bystanders to child sexual abuse. Actually, one of the digital stories created was perpetrator of child sexual abuse. So people kind of telling their stories and contextualizing them within a framework of transformative justice, within a framework of systems of oppression. And then the last thing that this project has been involved in is individual coaching of especially men who have perpetrated sexual violence, who are engaged in some form of community accountability process, or people who have sort of identified that they want to shift something in their behavior and have sought some one-on-one coaching for that. We've also done trainings and consulting. I'll say a little bit more about that as I get into it. So yeah, building off of Nathan's presentation and really just trying to unpack what does this thing called transformative justice look like? What's this, what do people do with these ideas in real life? How do they live kind of off of the paper? And so the pieces of work I'm going to talk about are just kind of one example of that. And for our community accountability work, because some of us were kind of out as child sexual abuse survivors, such as myself, or were involved in prison abolition work, and really active in different organizing spaces and communities, people started to come to us with cases of sexual assault, and in some cases also kind of cases of child sexual abuse, both historic and live, kind of seeking some help, some support. And the way that we sort of receive those is often not a sort of anonymous clearinghouse kind of way, but comes through personal relationships. And I think that that's a lot of how people get engaged in these things. It's not sort of an anonymous project where, kind of strangers will come in and help, at least not in our case. And so we would talk with the person who came to us, who often would either be the survivor, one of the survivors, or a bystander, seeking some support and trying to figure out what to do, because they did not want to go to the police for many of the reasons that Nathan mentioned earlier. And wanting to offer some sort of option besides either going to the police or not doing anything, or a third option, which is kind of vigilante violence, or stuff that we're just really familiar with doing, like sort of just kind of calling out, public shaming. And I name all those not to say that those aren't legitimate responses or that people shouldn't do those, but to say that people were looking for another way. And we wanted to try and help people figure that out and offer another option, wanting to sort of expand the range of options that that we have to address sexual violence. And often the roles that we in the Challenging Male Supremacy Project would play would either be to help organize and facilitate a process bringing together, sometimes we would use circles, for example, which I'm sure a lot of folks on this webinar are familiar with. We might build towards a circle process that would engage the person who caused harm, survivors, and people that are kind of deeply connected to each of them, in a process that would then lead to some commitments, and there would be an ongoing monitoring process. Other times it might look like just working with the person who caused harm. And in those cases, we have to get really clear about our goals. And Nathan spoke to those goals in one way, and I'll speak to them in another, which is that if we were just working with the person who caused harm and mainly focusing our energy there, we would want to make sure that the survivor or survivors had a network around them, that they were receiving support in their healing, in their agency, kind of going forward. And we would also want to check in and see, are there ways that there's a broader community around this, and how can we talk about community accountability, and literally, like how are we kind of collectively accountable? Who are the guys that go out drinking with the guy that committed sexual assault? How is there some accountability there in terms of what's considered acceptable, the nature of conversations, the nature of how people are sort of collectively organizing their lives and their livelihood. And so these are the kind of ways that we're engaged in community accountability work. And I'm sure there are things that are really obvious to me that I didn't make clear that folks can ask about afterwards. What I'm going to say about the study into action is that we ran two of these groups. We ran a group in 2009 and 2011. We invited men to participate in the group, and in 2009, because the three of us who initiated the project are all cisgender men, and we didn't quite feel prepared to really hold the kind of breadth of experience that comes with a sort of masculine of center or transgender experience of masculinity and sexual violence. Our group in 2009 was made up of about 15 cisgender men. And that changed in 2011, and there were transgender men and cisgender men in that group. And also our facilitation team had expanded to a group of 5 with Siddhartha Sanchez and Asma Otero. And in this group work, we brought together these cohorts of 15 to 20 men to come together for 9 sessions. 3 of those sessions were like full day sessions, 6 of those sessions like on a weekend, and 6 of those sessions were evening sessions. And we were seeking to do a few things. Participants in these groups could be people that sort of first came to us through an accountability process because they had caused harm, had been called out on it, or otherwise identified in some way and wanting to engage through that. Other people came because they felt like this was something they wanted to shift for themselves. And then others came because they wanted to step up their leadership around this work. And we really undertook the group work because we found that if we were just helping out with these community accountability responses, it felt like whack-a-mole. Like we would have energy to maybe work on 2 or 3, and there were 15 that we knew of, and we just realized that there was no way to tackle the problem. And also because we were approaching it from a transformative justice perspective, we started to look at how can we not only address these specific instances, but how can we start to shift culture from the places that we live and work. And so our approach was really grounded in a notion of embodiment, where we were looking to really support ourselves, the participants in the group, and actually shifting our lived practices. There was much less emphasis on developing an extremely precise and sophisticated analysis. Although we were certainly engaging with that, our emphasis was much more put on actually how are folks showing up, and what are the folks around each of us saying about how we're showing up. That was our sort of measure of growth, rather than had we all gotten like kind of really smart about issues of sexual violence and gender and sexuality. Another aspect of our approach was intersectionality. So, even when talking about men, it's like the sort of question of, well, which men and where? The majority of the men that facilitated our groups in 2011, especially, and participated were men of color. And so we really talk about, racialized masculinity as well. What are kind of specific issues we can ground down around white men, Black men, Afro-Caribbean men, Chinese men, the participants in the group that identified with these specific communities and identities will kind of lead the way in exploring these pieces and discussing how they really relate to the question of gender-based violence and men's role in it, kind of both within our broader networks, but then also within our family units, within other communities that we're a part of that pertain to those parts of our identity. And also thinking about how class, ability, sexual orientation, sexuality, and all of these things are a part of it and like mutually intertwined. The third piece, obviously, transformative justice, which we're talking about today. And lastly, collectivity. We really wanted to make sure that we were a group of men sort of working together collectively, rather than being sort of individual experts and leaders in that way. And I still think that's a really important thing to do. All right, so part of how we did this was we had accountability and support partners. So because we were a group of men addressing gender-based violence, we felt like we should be accountable to some folks, receive some support, and give some support. So some of the groups that supported this work, the group that Ejeris was a founder and a part of, and we'll talk about in a minute, called Safe Outside the System, from the Audre Lorde Project. The New York City affiliate of Insight, really fantastic community health center here in Brooklyn called Third Root Community Health Center. The Welfare Warriors Project, which is a really great project from a really great organization that's not with us anymore, but is still vital, called Careers for Economic Justice. And then Generative Somatics, which really helped with some of our work around embodiment. And then, of course, Generation 5 was sort of parent organization to our project throughout. Okay, so outcomes. With community accountability, I mean, anyone who's ever done this stuff knows it's generally like such a rough experience. And that's sort of what we decided to take on. I mean, I think anybody on this webinar, anybody that's been involved in community accountability knows that it's thankless in a lot of ways, and tough, and we're trying to figure out so many things. What I can say is that from a lot of, I don't want to say all, I'm going to say most of the cases we worked on, what we did find was that the men that we worked with specifically who were being accountable for harm they caused, we did not, for the most part, we did not hear of future harm caused by those participants. It was very rare that a participant showed up like a superstar and was totally transformed or anything like that. But I think it's important to note that future harm seemed to have been prevented or greatly diminished through engagement in this work. I think I'm getting low on time, so I'm going to say that in terms of ongoing work, you know, in a second, I'm going to talk about kind of the life cycle of a transformative justice organization. Because so many of our projects are totally, you know, sort of disconnected from state infrastructure and kind of challenging it, as there's not a lot of resourcing for it. And so with this project, we sustained it from 2008 to today in one form or another, although in more recent years, each of us has sort of spun off and taken it in different directions. Some of the core members of the group, one of them went to a major university here in New York and took the work we'd done and integrated into that university's response to gender-based violence. A number of us partnered with a high school here in the city, integrating this kind of framework into their response, and on and on. And we sort of took that, you know, took it into different spaces where we weren't necessarily explicitly the challenging male supremacy project, and oftentimes where we were being paid to do the work so we could support ourselves. 3 out of the 4 of us who were the core at the end of it are now parents of very young children. And so our, you know, it's like between paid work and trying to actually show up and be fully equal partners in the care work of raising young children has made our capacity to kind of do all the things I just described for you really low. And so one of the last big things we did was we created a website where we basically tried to share back everything we've done and make it really accessible and transparent. And that's something that a lot of different projects that have taken transformative justice on in one way or another have done, is leave these legacies of stories and resources as a way to share the work, even when the specific bodies involved in that project can sort of no longer sustain it. So yeah, this slide on TJ Initiative life cycles sort of gets to that these are often finite projects, partially because of ambivalence around 501c3 status or institutionalization, and also, you know, scarcity of foundation funding, other forms of funding. But then there are formations that are able to do consistent ongoing work. So you see both of these, and 2 examples are the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective, which Mia Mingus is a founder and I'm part of. And we're sad that she can't be with us today. She's not feeling well. And the Safe Outside the System Collective, which is an ongoing project that Ejeris is going to talk about in a minute, as one of the sites that does this stranger-based transformative justice work. Mimi Kim and folks have been able to sort of reinvigorate creative interventions in California and are doing some great trainings throughout the state. They wouldn't necessarily use the term transformative justice, but it's very much the same politics and often talk about community response. And then again, resource development and sharing. 3 things that kind of doing the work around child sexual abuse especially came out for us, and this is something I want to kind of put to everyone on the webinar, is we found that so many of us are so completely underprepared for what it takes to really hold this work well. And this just has to do with the stuff we don't learn in school. Most of us don't learn it at home. And you don't learn it anywhere else. And 3 kind of things that we held out as really being really, really helpful if we want to try and do this transformative justice work well. One is just being emotionally skillful in complex situations. So kind of trying to navigate a process that engages survivors, person or people who've caused harm, engage communities, and organize around social conditions. So complex. And I think building up some skills around being with one's own emotions, being with the emotions that come up for other people, and really holding those within the context of what we're moving towards, the transformative justice goals we're moving towards, and always keeping those at center. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of skill and practice. Another one is really just building skills around being able to support people in their trauma healing, and also being able to support people in their accountability. And the third one is having political analysis and organizing skills. And that especially really pertains to all parts. Pulling together a circle with people that don't necessarily want to come together. Organizing the people that are around the person who caused harm to get engaged in their work. That takes organizing, as does the work of actually mobilizing people to shift social conditions. So not saying that one person needs to be able to do all this stuff, but I think these are great qualities and skills to build, and they're great things to look for in building a team of people that want to do transformative justice work. You know, we don't each have to be able to do everything. If we can find other folks that can hold one part or the other, and we can support each other. Lastly, shouting out some of the resources and legacies, building on what Nathan mentioned, there's tons of great curriculum out there. Project Nia and Miriam Kaba's ongoing work and all the people she works with. There's the Toronto Transformative Justice Reading Group that put a curriculum online. Challenging Male Supremacy Project, we have ours. These are all curriculums that are just online accessible. Tools and toolkits. The gold standard is the Creative Intervention Toolkit. I mean, it's just an incredible, it's an amazing accomplishment. And the folks at Creative Interventions, Mimi, Kim, and everybody will tell you that it's not complete. And there are so many parts that are missing. And yet there's so much that's in it too. And then these other groups listed here: Philly Stands Up, Generation 5, Bay Area Transform Justice Collective, again, Insight, Young Women's Empowerment Project. All of these groups, many of whom are not active right now, or maybe have gone through periods of dormancy and reactivation as it is in the life cycle of many transformative justice projects. They've all created tools that are up online and accessible. And then storytelling also is one of these legacies that's left in two great projects: the Storytelling and Organizing Project, which maybe Kim was involved in, but also Rachel Herzing and Isaac Ontiveros. And then Living Bridges, which is me and Mingus's other project. Those are two places to start to hear stories within this context that are really incredible and really useful and available for anyone to use. It's free. Lastly, I want to plug a few upcoming resources. There's going to be a new version of the Generation 5 document around transformative justice and child sexual abuse coming out later this year, authored by Nathaniel Shara, who's a pretty neat person, if you ever get to meet him. Common Justice, which is an organization that works very closely with the Brooklyn DA and the state, and I think does a very interesting job of both addressing specific instances of harm and pushing back against the larger structures. So this is a really cool example of a more of a restorative justice project that I think falls somewhere squarely in at least some of what we would call transformative justice. Common Justice is putting out a document tomorrow called Accounting for Violence that's challenging mass incarceration and forwarding a restorative justice perspective. And I think it's really cool. You should look for it on the web tomorrow. And then again, Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective, that crew that's doing work around child sexual abuse in the Bay is kind of continually innovating and putting out really great resources to do transformative justice work. And those are just to name a few. There's so much other stuff going on that probably none of us know about. People that haven't even given their group a name or flown a flag, that are just figuring stuff out. So this is just like a small piece. And from there, I'll pass it over to Ejeris. Yeah.
Hey, all. Give me 1 second to get my PowerPoint up.
Johonna, we can't hear you.
She can't hear you.
I,
Oh, okay. I thought I was giving an overview of what we had heard so far, but I didn't realize. But I'm just gonna thank you so much, RJ, for what you shared. Can you all hear me now? All right, great. And then thank you, Ejeris.
Hey, all. Can you hear me? Awesome. So I think I'm bursting with excitement and gratitude to be in this community with you all. I was definitely deeply paying attention to my co-presenters, but I also was looking at the list of participants, and there's a lot of folks here who are doing incredible work around violence. So I want to start with just saying, I'm just feeling really grateful and really humble to enter into this work, recognizing that there's a long legacy that precedes us in this work. There's going to be a long legacy that comes after us. So my name's Reyes Dixon. I have most of the bulk of my work has been around the intersection of transformative justice work and stranger-based violence. The term that I've used, because I think we all hear that there's a lot of different ways that people talk about this work, and the term that I'm used to using is community safety, because it just resonated with people, and I don't think of it as that different. It's just like, how does a community create safety? And it was easy, it was simple, it was a way that we could kind of engage with folks during outreach and on a kind of a street by street basis. My history is that I helped, I was the founding staff member of a project called the Safe Outside the System Collective at the Audre Lorde Project in Brooklyn, New York. And I was there from 2005 and 2010. So clearly it's 2017. The project is vibrant and continuing. And a lot of my work now is supporting organizations around the country and around the world, actually, and supporting folks who are building their own community safety projects. So I feel really grateful and blessed that that's what I do, and I'm able to lend my capacity and experience to that. So when I'm talking about stranger-based violence, I'm talking about, violence between people who don't know each other. And so that can be violence that's based on oppression. Perceived race, I put perceived because when two people don't know each other, they often actually don't know their actual race or ethnicity. Perceived gender presentation, sexuality, class, ability, immigration status, and other forms of oppression. And then violence, I think a lot of violence is connected to and inspired by oppression, but there can also be violence that's just based between two unknown individuals. And this violence can happen on the street or in an event. And when I entered the kind of transformative justice and community accountability world, there had been a body of work that I was exposed to that really focused on people who had some connection to each other, whether it was violence that had happened in families, violence that had happened in intimate relationships, violence that had happened, and so and there was a series of incidents against lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people of color that was happening to strangers or two people who didn't know each other. And it was, we had a lot of incidents where we were working with people who were attacked based on their identity in the street or in the club. And then if they attempted, because many people didn't, but if they attempted to get support from the police, were attacked again. And so the idea was, what do we create and build for those moments? So violence, I like to talk about an incident of violence and note all the different ways you can intervene, address, or shift violence, because I think it's important to see that you can prevent violence before it happens, you can intervene while it's occurring, you can repair the harm to the survivors and community, and you can transform the behavior. And when two people, when you know who both of the people are, when you maybe know what communities they roll with or who has leverage or connection, you have more opportunity at time to play in the land of repairing or transforming harm. But there's a lot of work that when all you know is that these two people were at this point, at this corner at night, then it meant that a lot of the work that I've done was in the prevention and intervention realm as a way to kind of build the community response and support to do the work of transformation. But I still see that nevertheless, when you're building a community to respond to violence without reliance on the state, that is still transformative justice work to me. So a couple principles, I'm talking fast, let me slow down. A couple principles that I think are really important are relationship building, experimentation, skill building, and keeping it real. And so what I mean by relationship building, and RJ touched upon this as well, is that community accountability, transformation, community safety, we've got the word community in there. And so I've had this experience multiple times where people will say, hey, my neighbors, I heard something that sounded like violence, and it was the people next door, and what should I do? And my first question is, well, what's your relationship with the people next door? And because that shifts everything. And sometimes people are like, oh, I don't really know them. And I'm like, well, we're going to have to get to know them. Like that's where we start. For us to, whether you want to say that these 3 blocks or this neighborhood or this building or this, whatever location you decide to be the site that you want to address violence at, one of the key pieces is about like, what is the relationship between people? So a lot of the work that I've done was about helping connect people to each other and building stronger relationships. There were times when we worked with people who were attacked on their way home or repetitively attacked on their way home. So our goal was helping them build relationships with people, institutions that were on their way home. And so that they could either know people better or that they could use places as refuge. So I think that I'm a kind of born and raised old school organizer where I used to kind of do outreach like 8 to 10 hours a day and a history of door knocking and all that stuff. And I believe in those skills. Like I believe that we cannot fully transform our societies until we build the relationships with each other. And you kind of have to say hi first before you start talking about violence. It's just like a baseline. So the second thing that I would say is sometimes we feel like we have to do a ton of research and we get perfectionist about this work, but I think we're actually in a history and legacy of experimentation. And I want to encourage us to make bold, and I almost say bold, small experiments. Don't say, we're going to eradicate all the violence in our state outside the system now. Like that's big, that's hard. But you might be able to say, for these 3 buildings, or for this block, or for this part of our neighborhood, we want to challenge violence. And I think then you can just break it down into bite-sized pieces. So there's a lot that I've learned through practice. There's a lot that I've learned through doing it wrong. I've been talking a lot about failing well and failing beautifully and failing brilliantly and humbly, meaning like write down where we got it wrong, learn from there, try to make a new mistake next time. So I think there's a piece where it's really hard because we're navigating violence. And this is deeply impacting people's safety and dignity and their lives. And so the concept of experimenting with violence sounds really hard, but we're living in the midst of a terrible criminal legal system experiment. And I would just say that to say, I would really encourage us to offer up experiments that challenge that, move us closer towards liberation and move us closer towards transformation within that. So the next thing I think is really important is skill building. Just because I believe in transforming violence doesn't necessarily mean that I have the skill set to do all this work. And I'm not saying that you have to get a social work degree or any of these things. I'm saying that there's also an incredible skill set in life experience. So I'm a childhood survivor of violence, and I've also experienced intimate partner violence and sexual violence. And I think my experiences of survival taught me a lot. And I learned a lot about de-escalating violence, living in a violent household. And I've learned a lot along the way around what safety feels like, what safety sounds like. So there's a piece where we, when I was at the Audre Lorde Project, we wanted to intervene in violence, and we took the skills that we had learned from people around how to make an action or a demonstration safe, and we started to apply that to when we were seeing violence on the street. And how do we intervene in violence? And what does that mean about posture? What does that mean about vocal tone? What does that mean about where we place our hands? And also what makes certain people feel safe or look safe, or what de-escalates violence on one person's body, how that really shifts on various people's bodies, and getting to know all those skills. And to some degree, it actually took me back into my own life and my own self and my own history of, when I talk about verbal de-escalation to people, I say, everyone at some point has at least tried and often has successfully navigated an argument or fight. And I want to build on what worked for you there to move on. So I would say that I think skill building is critical, and we never know where we will build those skills. There's a way that we learned a lot about de-escalation from bouncers, from school safety officers, from all kinds of different people. And so I would say, build your skills, know where you're at, and also keep practicing, right? We have a life full of opportunities to practice. The last principle that's really important to me to talk about is around keeping it real. There's a point that I remember, and I don't know if it also impacts if Nathan and RJ, this also was something that you all remember. There was a point where I felt like I was doing this like transformative justice work before it got like popular and cool and people started to talk to you about it. And there was so much more freedom in what we could say, we do or no. And then it became almost like, I'm down with transformative justice and you're gonna like wear it on your jacket, right? And then there'd be like, I remember just a lot of intense judgment and shame entering in like how people were doing this work, how this work is supposed to look, what is right and what is wrong. That almost negates the fact that we are experimenting. And there was a point when I was at ALP and we created a workshop that was called There's No Movement Ambulance, so what do we do in the meantime? And the idea was that we wanted to be honest, because there are people who said, well, I think it's messed up if someone ever calls 911. And I've said really clearly, I've been working on de-escalating violence for 12 years now. I have no skill set around like a gunshot wound. That's not my skill set. 911, that's what we call. And then we de-escalate from there. I'm really excited that there are projects now where people are organizing and supporting and creating alternative emergency systems like that. Clearly, you can probably see it in my face. Like that gets me really, really excited. But I also think I want us to not pretend to be people that we're not, and to just say, okay, here's what we've created. Here's what we know. Here's where we're going. And it's okay to hang out in uncertainty. It's okay to not quite be where we need, and let's just bring people in to build us even further. So I want to talk about some examples. So this is the sticker that when I was at Modular Project we made, and we put up on different community-based institutions who agreed to de-escalate violence without relying on the criminal legal system, and who also, some of whom agreed that people who were escaping violence could run into them. So it was like a very simple twist on what like some people call community watch programs or things like that, but it was a twist that was connected to the idea that we believe that we could create safety without relying on the criminal legal system. And so we recruited businesses and organizations. We asked them to join. We used the skills that we had been building around verbal de-escalation and physical de-escalation. We trained them. We connected these spaces to each other. And the belief was, like, through these relationships, we could eventually create a community-based network so that at some point we could actually say, oh, okay, here are the people we know and the institutions we know that are in this area. This incident happened at this point in time. Now we actually have a base of people to help us address it. And that was the Safe Outside the System Collective as we worked on it. We spent a couple of years at the beginning really learning about other projects. We did the thing that I cautiously caution against, where we were trying to make it perfect before we started. We were looking for the people who had already created the amazing stranger-based violence program that created safety for queer and trans people of color. We eventually realized it was our job, so we worked on it. And there's a lot. There's something I've learned along the way when I'm talking to other people who've done transformative justice work, and I can really tell how much they've done, because there's a piece around each incident is different, each project is different. There's a lot we learn along the way. So there are principles we can adhere to, but the idea that it's always this and never that, like the idea that we don't do this work, that there's no nuance in this work, it's like the people I know who've been in the game for a while, we speak with a lot of nuance because we've learned a lot along the way. I want to also lift up other examples that I'm not an expert in, but you should become, and you should connect with, and you should support. So Spirit House in Durham, North Carolina has a harm-free zone, and I've been impressed with their work for a good decade now. And although I think it actually has been around longer, they do some work around navigating and addressing kind of the violence that happens from drug enforcement through the state and finding ways to navigate that without the system. And they also are doing some work around how you can create safety within schools. They have a whole host of work. Check out their website, support them. But I wanted to lift that up is there are many ways to do stranger-based violence. Other projects that I'm geeked about are the Oakland Power Projects and Cahoots in Oregon. And I have to lift up Rachel Herzing for turning me on to both of these projects, because she has an incredible article about them. These are both projects where people are trying to actually do that, creating an alternative 911. And I think that that is something that is possible and powerful in many communities. It's because to some degree, it's about building skills and organizing people who have those skills and connecting the political analysis that we have, because at least in New York City, I can't speak to where you live, when often when you call 911, you're also calling the police, and you may or may not want police intervention. And the degree to which the police can get involved is often the call of the paramedic or EMT. So when we create projects outside of those paradigms, we can find ways to make skills that we have been socialized are unique to the system, that are things that can only happen within the system, and we can actually make them skills that we create within our own communities. So I was also asked to talk a little bit about transformative justice in these times. And I almost even hate that I wrote never mind. I won't get into the politics of whether or not you write or say his name. But so it's already been a lot. This administration is pretty new. And I wanted to start with like kind of like, what are we seeing, right? So we're seeing a rise of state-sanctioned and state-fueled violence. We're seeing emboldened white supremacists. We're seeing basically oppressive attitudes, actions, and oppression-based violence, and we're seeing all of that be fueled and sanctioned. No matter where you are in terms of your belief around policy reform, we've also seen some executive orders come down that are rolling back or promising to roll back police reform efforts, which whether or not we felt that those reforms were shifting or changing, the piece that it does, it also sends a culture, and the cultural message is that our communities are going to be, or marginalized communities are going to be less safe. We can expect and are already seeing a rollback of particularly government-based funding for social services, staffing of those services, and we're also going to be, or currently experiencing, a reduction of anti-discrimination laws. Again, no matter our opinions on whether or not those laws created less discrimination, we also see the fact that it's a cultural message. So, and the other piece I want to say is that we're seeing the costs of doing movement work are higher. And I'm not talking financial costs, I'm actually talking about people who are doing direct action. Like you see a lot of the folks who are protesting against the inauguration, and there are felony charges being placed on folks in a way that we hadn't seen before. A lot of folks are either experiencing direct surveillance or have a really intelligent reason to be concerned. We're seeing the implications of an increase in raids on immigration. And we're seeing a broadening of the criteria of these raids. And we've also seen the impact of this Muslim ban. And on top of that, our folks have been mobilizing 24/7, right? So we're also seeing the capacity we need versus the capacity we have. So every challenge has an opportunity. Every challenge has an ability to make us rethink or shift how we do our work. So the opportunity is that it is clearer than it has been in quite a while, the need for non-state-based ways for us to support each other, to intervene in violence, and for us to prevent violence. People are having those conversations in community in a different way, and thinking about what we need to set up. And I'm really encouraging people to be both narrow and broad. So narrow meaning, what are the safety systems that you need with your immediate loved ones? And how are you setting those up? Who are the most vulnerable people in your immediate circle? And how are you figuring out how you will alert each other around what needs are? How can you do almost an inventory of resources and access and privileges among your immediate folks? I also would say, oh, 1 minute, wow. All right, moving along. So I think another opportunity is that we have a strong movement infrastructure. We've got a larger, more active base building off of the incredible mobilizing of the Movement for Black Lives, of immigration movements, of a lot of really progressive movements. And we also have an increase of new folks into our movements. And I think we have an opportunity to really move, and some people are already doing this, around like, what does it mean to make community-based violence de-escalation networks? What does it mean to like not just learn bystander intervention, but set up structures for it? Do we need to think about like, what is an underground railroad in this moment? And how do we connect all of these smaller projects, right, narrow to broad, to our broader movements? And that for me is really a need and an invigoration for all of us to incorporate transformative justice processes into our lives, because violence will continue to happen, harm will continue to happen. And so how are we building that within community? And how are we also building broad, recognizing that the most marginalized among us and the people who who are experiencing multiple oppressions are also going to or currently experience a heightened level of violence. I'll stop there because I am really excited to be in conversation with you all, and yeah, and that's all I have to say. So questions, and I think Johonna is gonna facilitate this part.
Yes. So first of all, wow. You all have just provided such an incredible array of information, of resources, of theory, of challenges. So I really appreciate this. One of the reasons I wanted to have you all on for this webinar is I wanted to, haven't been connected to the transformative justice movement and the work in a while. I wanted to get more plugged in and reconnected myself, as well as have other people to know who aren't aware of what transformative justice is and the organizing that's happening, which is so important. So let me just jump in with a couple of questions that we have now. We have almost 10 minutes for some questions. So one question, just more straightforward, is there an existing tool for creating a safety plan for members in your organizing spaces? And this question comes from Janae Taylor. A tool for creating a safety plan for members in your organizing spaces.
I can start if other people want to jump in. I think it depends on what type of safety we're talking about. So are we talking about people experiencing individual harm? Are we talking about an office safety plan if there's like violence that happens within an organizing space? Are we talking about how do we organize safer events? I'm pretty sure my colleagues can pick up on individual safety planning, so I'm actually going to pause with that. But in terms of organizational safety plans for events, the Audre Lorde Project has been putting out some really great curriculum around parties and safe spaces and security planning. So I would reach out to the Audre Lorde Project, www.alp.org. I've been working with my team at Vision Change Win and with also Roadmap Consulting on a community safety curriculum that talks about office safety protocols. And so those are the two resources I would create from there. I also think a lot of anti-violence organizations have protocols around navigating violence in their space without law enforcement, not all, but many. So I think that that's also a resource that people can use in their own communities.
I'll just jump in briefly on the more individual level to say, I think the Northwest Network of bi, trans, lesbian, and gay survivors of abuse based in Seattle, but their website is nwnetwork.org, has done some really powerful thinking on kind of the dynamism of safety planning. They really talk about safety plan as a verb rather than a piece of paper that goes in a drawer, but really how to be in the ongoing daily conversations and brainstorming of supports that someone needs in order to navigate the kind of ongoing changing context of safety. I think we often think of safety as safe or not safe, and what we know is depending on the moment, depending on the conditions, safety can mean and include a lot of different things. So I would definitely encourage folks to check that out.
Thank you all. So this is also a pretty straightforward question. If you all can just give a few examples of some of the things that people have done to repair harm in the processes that you all have organized and facilitated when you have people who have caused harm. What are some of the things they've done, even I guess beyond or perhaps even including behavioral change, to repair the harm?
Yeah, I'll start on that. I think we could all throw in all kinds of different examples. I think foundational ones, think of sort of like saying sorry and then doing sorry. So I never want to skip over the fact that like what's read as an authentic apology is important. And then what comes after it I think one of the biggest is with people I've worked with is just that they're honoring the requests of survivors. It's just a huge one. And so that can look like a lot of different ways. It can be staying, respecting that person's space for a certain period of time, often a number of years. In some cases, people have contributed money towards a survivor's therapy expenses or other expenses. other requests have been around engaging in other requests for that person. So for example, if the person who caused harm also is struggling with some mental health issues or substance abuse, sometimes the request is actually that the person can sort of actually seek help around those things. A lot of times I found that survivors are both interested in kind of what they might need, but then there are also oftentimes lots of requests that really have to do with taking care of other folks, making sure that no one else gets hurt. I've found that often survivors that I've worked with hold that as something that for them is also a meaningful form of accountability. There's a few examples.
Thank you all. So we only have a question for we only have time for one more question, but I just want to name some of the others and hopefully we can address them in another way. One is a community organizer who's online, who recently relocated to the Dallas-Fort Worth area and is interested in connecting with people in Texas that are involved in transformative justice. So if any of you all have any resources you can send, then that would be helpful and you all can answer that by text. Another resource I just want to mention, and we put online, is the Creative Interventions Toolkit. And that I think has a lot of resources for how do you engage with people who use manipulation tactics and that type of thing was another question that we have. So the Creative Interventions Toolkit is on the Creative Interventions website. But I'll just pose this one last question, and this comes from Rajitha Rita Alfred, who's done a lot of restorative justice work in Oakland, and I very much appreciate the work that she's been doing as a leader and work in the school. So in terms of the institutional support for the harms, how do we move toward dismantling the institutional power and continuing the harm? And this is a question that is very relevant to a lot of us, both centered in restorative justice, transformative justice, in both. Anyways, kind of thoughts you have on that in terms of how do we call out the institutions and hold them responsible? And I'm thinking especially institutions that, for example, a university or schools or organizations.
I'll kick us off, and then Ejeris might say something as well. I think, and I don't know if this is quite what you're getting at, but I actually think it can also be really useful to sort of join what's a Transformative Justice project that's maybe more focused on addressing incidences or maybe addressing culture within a certain space, like for example what we did with the Challenging Male Supremacy project. It can be really useful to partner with organizations whose focus is perhaps more on addressing institutions or larger social structures. So not sort of having to reinvent that organizing work, but finding if there's some way for a generative collaboration with groups that are working on conditions at that scale.
I feel like I've been caught in this question a lot, where people are like, well, what's the transformative justice plan for police violence, right? Or what's the and to some degree we're already talking, when we're talking about institutions, we're talking about systems, and therefore we can talk about whether that's inside or outside of our own models. One thing I'm thinking about are the safety beyond policing projects, where folks are doing a lot of work to divest money out of local police, local harmful institutions, and invest and organizing to invest that money into more supportive, either community-based institutions or even other social services. So I think that that's a way, and I do think it's not, connecting to what RJ said, it's not necessarily an either or to call out an institution and to also do transformative justice work. I think it's also about like, what is that partnership, and how are we building our own alternative institutions as well?
I'll just throw in briefly, I think one thing that kind of along the same lines of holding this, where are the policies and laws and institutional practices that we need to dismantle, and then what are the alternatives and the power building that we need to create in communities. I think one thing that, again, kind of coming out of addressing child sexual abuse, is really looking at what are existing campaigns, work, organizing, policy struggles where we can integrate the conversation of naming child sexual abuse and increasing the awareness of community-based violence and state violence into conversations that are already happening. So whether that's something like really taking a look at mandatory reporting laws or sex offender registries, I think some of what we're really seeing is highlighting and pointing out in existing conversations about institutional power, where are the places where accountability is getting disincentivized, and are there places to actually shift that so that there is a kind of proactive, compelling draw towards accountability, and how do we keep creating those conditions, what needs to get dismantled and what needs to get built up. And I really appreciate you, Ejeris, what you were saying of like really looking at the 3-block radius, or what are the small wins that we can experiment with to then start imagining scale.
Thank you. Once again, RJ, Nathan, Ejeris, cannot thank you all enough for what you all have shared with us. An immense topic, which you fit a lot into the hour and a half that we've had together. And this also, I think, just raises attention to the need that we need to our need to have more conversations around these issues. So thank you once again. And I'm going to turn it over to Kajungu Maturi, who's going to give us some announcements and share a little bit about the webinars that we have left in our series. But RJ, Nathan, Ejeris, thank you very much.
Thanks, Johonna.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you also to all of those who joined us for this webinar.
Yeah, again, thank you so much for attending this webinar. And my name is Kajungu Maturi, and I'm a graduate student at the Center for Justice and Peace Building in Harrisonburg, Virginia. I work as the graduate assistant for the Zehr Institute, and I have a couple announcements to share with you all. First of all, the spring of 2017 webinar series is focusing on building bridge from margins to center. Each webinar will be feed into the theme of the June of 2017 National Conference on Community and Restorative Justice. As in the past, all webinars will take place on Wednesday from 4:30 to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. March 22nd, we'll have another webinar. The title will be how as cycle keepers addressing system of oppression, and this will be hosted by Johonna. And April 18, it will be listen to a movement, and it will be hosted by Zehr. And April 26, it will be bridging the divide, and it will be hosted by Carl Stauffer. It is not too early to sign up for the Center for Justice and the Peace Building Summer Peace Building Institute for Summer 2017. SPI is a 4-week intensive during May and June, offering 20 different courses. If you are interested in taking an intensive course on restorative justice, here are 3 of the options available during the curriculum. All of these course options are available online. Strategy for Trauma Awareness and Resilience, which is STAR, otherwise known as STAR, is a research-based training program that brings together the theory and the practice for neurobiology, conflict transformation, human security, spirituality, and restorative justice to address the needs of trauma-impacted individuals and the communities. This program is designed for individuals and organizations whose work brings them into contact with population dealing with current or historical trauma. There are several opportunities to receive STAR training. Currently, there are 4 level 1 session, which will be in Virginia and Pennsylvania, and a level 2 training at EMU in Virginia. And if you're interested in participating or have any question More information can be found online. Graduate certificate in restorative justice. The certificate is 18 credit hours with equal focus given to conflict analysis and the practice. Restorative justice studies and the electives which could focus on monitoring and evaluation, psychosocial trauma, and etc. The certificate can be completed through a number of courses offered through the annual Summer Peace Building Institute, which is SPI, or through a combination of one semester on the campus and the one summer term. Restorative justice education. If you are interested in the intersection of restorative justice and education, you will have this opportunity. Master in Education with Restorative Justice Education concentration will be offered. A 15 hours graduate certificate in Restorative Justice Education, and it can be used by a variety of professionals working in education setting. There is also a master degree in conflict transformation, and along with that, this fall marks the beginning of CJP offering a master's degree in restorative justice. The curriculum is practice-based, the ideal for individuals looking to the reflective practitioners within their chosen field. Last but not least, the Zehr Institute website is available as a source for upcoming events, resources, the schedule of upcoming webinars, and a repository for past webinars that are linked to YouTube. The recording for tonight's webinar will be available early next week. That concludes my announcement. So here's Johonna with a few closing comments.
Johonna. Let me unmute myself so you can hear me. Thank you, Kajungu. So I just want to once again thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. It will be made available online in just a few days so that you can share with others, and you can also check back and look at the many resources that were provided. Today's webinar was a lot of information, so I definitely would encourage people to come back, perhaps look at it again, and definitely take down some of the, go deeper into the resources that were shared. And again, to our guests, incredible guests who are doing very important, very innovative work. And my hope is that having these conversations around restorative justice and transformative justice, we can actually do more to connect these movements that are together looking for really, how do we move toward a justice that heals? So thank you all, and have a wonderful morning, day, evening, wherever you are in the world.